I must find out the source of this infernal rumbling.
We weren't mumbling, Skeletor.
Not mumbling, you meatheads. Rumbling. Rumbling.
Welcome back to the He-Man episode reviews, and this time it's a weird 2-for-1. The Eye of the Beholder from Season 1 and The Bitter Rose from Season 2. Why am I reviewing these episodes together? Well, that's because they're weirdly sort of connected by the appearance of these insect people in the former who will reappear in the latter. Now, normally with these sorts of instances, it's just the animation directors getting lazy and reusing character models from prior episodes to make new characters, such as in the case of Masks of Power and Wizard of Stone Mountain, or like the dozens of times we reused the Old Man, or like the 3 times Celise from Song of Celise is recast as a different character. But no, this time, not only am I pretty convinced these are supposed to be the same insect people, they even have 2 of them named in the first episode, and they both reappear in the second one. And it's super weird when you stop to consider that A, there are no intersecting writers or directors between these 2 episodes, and B, the plots of the 2 episodes are completely different too. So, let's start off with The Eye of the Beholder. This episode begins with Duncan and Adam on a joyride with the Wind Raider, which suddenly stops working mid-flight. Adam becomes He-Man, saves their skins, but begins noticing that he's having difficulty lifting the Wind Raider. As he and Duncan return to the palace, they begin noticing a lot of other distressing things. A tree has suddenly wilted, Orko's magic isn't working, and the Wind Raider has no mechanical problems whatsoever. Eventually, Duncan realizes that Eternia's oxygen content has been lowered, which is why nothing seems to work and He-Man keeps getting weaker. He-Man learns via the sorceress that the main water supply to Eternia is the Sea of Eternity, and that without it, the plants won't grow and therefore produce oxygen. So, He-Man heads to the source with the help of an oxygen diving tank from Duncan, the path taking him through a cave system. He gets jumped by these weird insect people who believe he's a spy and somehow responsible for their eggs not hatching. The shaman is distrustful, but the bugman Garth believes in He-Man, and luckily there's a convenient cave-in that allows He-Man to show his resolve. So Garth joins He-Man on his quest, and discovers that Skeletor's behind everything, because of course he is. And they also manage to take down Beastman and Triclops. They find Skeletor draining the Sea of Eternity with a giant machine. Skelly manages to yoink and destroy He-Man's tank, which means that he doesn't have the strength to take on Skeletor. Garth jumps into the Sea of Eternity to block the draining tube, and then emerges transformed. He naps Skelly's oxygen tank and saves He-Man. After this, He-Man destroys Skelly's dam, freeing the water and ending the danger. Eye of the Beholder was written by Jeffrey O'Hare, with the teleplay from David Wise. O'Hare, by the way, also wrote The Search for the VHO, one of my favorite episodes. Now, you may remember that I mentioned this episode in my top 5 Skeletor plans video, as indeed, Skelly's plan seems to be to weaken everyone in Eternia so he can take over without any resistance. I mean, it is a diabolical plan when you consider that a lot of people could have potentially died as a result. But I kinda fail to see the logical follow-through in the plan. Now, George DeZenzo, better known as the voice of Hordak, does a cameo as the voice of Garth, and does add some nice gravitas to the proceedings, the same way as he did when he voiced Lord Turan in The Sleepers Awaken, a little detail that I completely forgot to mention in the episode review for that one. I do think his transformed form looks a bit weird, but I think the explanation that he's evolved speedily thanks to the waters of the Sea of Eternity is kinda cool. But, like I said, kinda odd. Also, the episode makes a clumsy attempt at a racism storyline with the insect people. It's especially ineffective because it does nothing except kill some screen time. And there's also a pretty weak Beastman and Triclops cameo. They get to be part of like one fight scene and that's it. The animation is pretty high quality, but feels a bit stilted, though there are some great art moments in here. On the whole though, I think the episode really feels a little too serious, and that's partly why I've never really liked it. It doesn't have any funny or action-packed highlights. Garth attacking the baddies is the funniest part of the episode, alongside Garth's transformation, I guess. Also, the episode is a pretty thinly veiled science lesson about the importance of oxygen. Actually, scratch thinly veiled. The sorceress of all people goes into a full monologue about the importance of oxygen, and photosynthesis, I guess. That being said, it's no wonder why I'm not that wild about this episode. I don't hate it, and like I said, Skelly's plot is pretty good. But beyond that, this episode leaves a lot to be desired elsewhere. So let's talk about the Bitter Rose now. This episode begins with Duncan and Orko revealing a painting of the Bitter Rose to the King and Queen, with Duncan relaying its sad origin story. Apparently, the Bitter Rose is a memento from a goddess who lost her lover and because of which nothing else grows on the same mountain where the bitter rose is located. Driel is just randomly at the palace, I guess she's just visiting, and starts sobbing over the story. Orko wants her to feel better and shoots the shit with Cringer for a while, who accidentally convinces Orko that getting the bitter rose as a gift might be a good idea. So Orko goes and gets the rose, and almost immediately the mountain begins falling apart. Weirdly, the insect people from the Beholder episode are now living underneath this random mountain, and Garth of all people sees Orko fly away with the rose. The shaman sends a messenger to the palace to get help while Garth tries to follow Orko, who inexplicably flies past Snake Mountain. We'll come back to this later. Skelly has been spying on the proceedings and sends Beastman and Trapjaw to capture Orko, who amazingly succeed. Okay, well, not amazingly. Orko is in fact having his magic drained by the rose. However, Beastman stupidly lets Orko go when he's trying to water the rose. Meanwhile, He-Man and company are fighting back the rock slides. And they learn from the shaman that the rose has to be returned in order for the rock slides to end. Eventually, Garth does manage to rescue Orko and rendezvous with Teela and Duncan. During the chase, Trapjaw accidentally shoots the rose, causing the bad guys to abandon the chase. Now, while all seems lost, Duncan luckily remembers his Deus Ex Machina back in the lab, which was shown for like 10 seconds earlier. But it then fails to revive the rose? Wait, seriously? Oh, but Driel and the power of love revive it.
We didn't need the machine at all.
Wow, I think we can officially crown this as Duncan's most useless invention. So the rose is returned to the mountain, and this then frees the Rose Goddess, who is moved by Driel and Orko's love. She's able to pass on, and the mountain begins growing new flowers all over the place. So the Bitter Rose was penned by one-time-only writer Michael Chase Walker, and while I get a warm, fuzzy Season 1 feeling from seeing the Beastman and Trapjaw duo in this one, this is unmistakably a Season 2 episode. And no, not just because of the Roton. This episode is honestly a bit goofy and has a bunch of buck-wild, even seemingly random elements in it. I love the ending gag where Beastman and Trapjaw are trying to fool Skelly by painting a normal rose to be the same color as the bitter rose, I guess? Garth also has a weirdly active role in this episode, which I do love, and there's a lot of great art detail here, though the animation isn't always super crisp. Now, there are some weird inconsistencies with the insect people, like how only some of them have evolved now, how they now have pupils and don't live underground anymore. And I also thought his people swore to protect the Sea of Eternity at the end of the previous episode. That part's kinda conveniently swept under the rug. Also, Garth is now voiced by John Irwin and not George DeZenzo, but I do like the performance here. And sure, this episode has another thinly veiled science lesson because the mountain collapsing is stopped by more plants growing there, but here it at least feels a little bit more organic and doesn't bother me. What does bother me is the fact that throughout the episode, He-Man keeps referring to rock slides as avalanches. At first I was a bit convinced that maybe rock slides could also be called avalanches, but then He-Man also makes a reference to sleigh rides, which kind of makes me think this episode was supposed to be more snowy, and somehow the episode director didn't catch on. And also, again, characters are just randomly flying past Snake Mountain on their way to Palace Eternos, the same way as in the episode Teela's Triumph. Seriously, somebody needs to make me a map of Eternia where this actually makes some kind of sense, because flying past Snake Mountain seems like a bad idea any way you slice it. There has to be a safer detour around it. Although I wasn't wild about this episode the first time I saw it, I have to say I actually kinda like it a lot better simply because it's so goofy and over the top and doesn't suffer from the same kind of serious stiltedness as the Eye of the Beholder episode. And like I said, it's just weird seeing this random connection between Season 1 and 2. In all honesty, I do think The Bitter Rose is a more worthwhile episode, despite Skelly's nefarious and pretty decent plot in the first one. And those were the reviews. I'm TheHande. Until next time, I have the power, so can you.